I started trying to save people, that I was trying to like stop people from making bad financial decisions. And since then, I just simply do not care, because people who desperately want to make those bad decisions, they're going to do it whether I want them to or not. I compared it to going into a casino and going up to people who are gambling and being like, don't do that, you're going to lose money. And then being like, I know I'm going to lose money, please fuck off.
Like a couple of episodes ago, I had a guy or maybe a girl who used a voice changer to record the episode, and that like completely screwed up many parts of Riverside. So
there you go.
Yeah, well, that is. Oh my God! See, this is why we do the roll in, is because we'll start the episode right there, and then I will introduce Bennett, Tomlin, and Cas Piancey of the podcast, the great podcast Crypto Critics Corner, who are very generously joining me here today in I'll say it's like 1/3 of the return of a favor, I guess, is how the math works out at this point. We just figured out.
Also, you had us on at Consensus, and I think that was great. I loved doing that. It was really wonderful for you to get us on stage with you. I think that was really fun. So
and you guys actually had to travel for that. So not only are we even, but I think we're back to me owing you, because you had to go all the way to Austin of all places. Yeah. So, which I gather you're not at Consensus this year.
Yeah, that would be correct. I don't know if we're ever going to be invited back now that Mr. Teal is involved, but we'll see.
Wait, what? I didn't even know this. I've missed this.
Oh yeah, Bullish bought CoinDesk, so that's Peter Thiel.
Is it? I didn't know he was I thought that was just like okay, we're doing a live investigation now. I thought
I don't know if he's majority owner or minority. I think he gets a nice big fat say in what they do.
Yeah.
He was the lead investor of their largest fundraising.
See, this is the thing. I can't keep track of all of the bad actors involved, because my focus is entirely on EOS and Dan Larimer in that situation. Yeah, I guess
EOS, the forgotten blockchain.
Well, some of us are keeping the anger alive. And I guess Brock Pierce by extension, right?
Yeah,
he was there, and then they had to put out all those press releases about how he wasn't actually involved. They just took his money. That was a whole fun thing back in 2018.
And co-founder of Tether.
Right, exactly. Before we get too deep into this, though, Cas and Bennett. Cas, I don't know. Well, I know, Cas, you are doing a lot of reporting for Protos. And Bennett as well, but I don't know if there are other things about yourselves that you want to make sure people know before we dive in.
No, I think you've covered it. We mostly, I think most of our day-to-day work is through Protos, which you covered the Sam Bankman-Fried trial for Protos, which was awesome. We do Crypto Critics Corner, which lately has been more or less every 2 weeks or so. We're putting an episode out, but I think that just about covers our what we do for cryptocurrency in general.
And the reason I wanted to have Cas and Bennett on is, well, A, we just have been friends for a while, but B, specifically, they are, I think, a really good example of the kinds of healthy skepticism that is good for the crypto space, for technology, for pretty much anything. And we're going to talk about kind of the fine line between being a skeptic and being... Well, I guess the crypto term is no coiner, and I don't know what the general term might be for the type of person we're talking about, but
well, I would say I mean, I am a no coiner. I think Bennett is still too. Both of us don't. If Bennett has any coins, it's probably just because he was messing around with some protocol or something and has some left over. But largely we.
You've already disqualified yourself. You're already not a no coiner if you've ever actually touched any of.
We have both, for what it's worth, and I think we've made this clear. We've both purchased and sold cryptocurrency before. Yes. Like that is not that is something
part of what I want to talk about. Yeah.
We both utilized it. Both of us, I think, got interested in cryptocurrency because we actually liked a lot of the concepts. We didn't come in as people who were trying to find frauds and scams and talk about all the issues with it. We came in because we were both, I I don't know if believers are the nice, like the terms that I would use, but at least saw some interesting ideas that we supported.
Intellectually curious, I think, is probably the word that you're looking for. And
Yeah.
one that is just not in the vocabulary of a lot of people, apparently. I also, and just to kind of preview a little bit more, we're going to talk a lot, I think, about FTX and its connections to Tether, which Tether has over the years been kind of your most consistent topic, which I guess in a weird way sort of embodies the balance that I'm talking about here, which is to say that Tether has done terrible, awful things, allegedly. But there is now this shift, and you guys might not be on board with this shift, but I think that there has been a broad shift, thanks to a few different things, to people having at least more confidence that Tether is solvent. And so that has been an interesting part of the story, which I think is worth going into. But what I want to get from you guys first is just the high-level overview of the relationship between Alameda Research specifically and Tether, and sort of, I guess, I don't remember how directly the Deltec Bank fits in, but let's. Can you just give me the overview? Because again, this is not a total blind spot for me, but definitely maybe the main aspect of the entire case that I'm least familiar with.
I'll kick it off if that's all right. Alameda Research for a long time was the trading firm that issued the largest number of tethers, principally on Tron, totaling in excess of 35 billion total issued, and we were able to identify, I want to say, around 1 billion in redemptions, so still net out well in excess of 30 billion in issuance they did. And they did that in ways that aren't entirely clear, because none of the forensic accounting that's been done as part of the bankruptcy or Sam Bankman-Fried's criminal trials seem to point towards 35 billion US dollars moving through these accounts. But we can identify some of it, and a lot of it was moving through Deltec, who was a partner bank for both Tether and Bitfinex, though Tether has moved the bulk of their banking to other Caribbean banks at this point. But Deltec was this important bank that kind of mediated a lot of this relationship. If you look at the lawsuit filed by the FTX debtors in possession against Deltec, they detail Deltec's role of extending effective loans to Alameda Research so that Alameda Research could get tethers without actually paying for them. And this seems to be kind of the key to starting to unravel the whole relationship, is that Alameda Research was able to effectively get fronted a large amount of tethers, and then based on Sam Bankman-Fried and other executives' public statements, they had some place, and we can talk a little bit about what that probably is, some place they were able to consistently and relatively quickly sell these tethers for over par. And so what this relationship seemed to look like was Deltec would extend the money to Alameda. Alameda Research would then be able to get a large allotment of tethers from Tether. They would take those tethers and sell them somewhere for over $1, get that money back, and then pay back Deltec. And so the primary drive of the relationship here is that Alameda Research was a client of Tether and one of the most important, and then Deltec seemed important in the financial intermediation of the Tether Alameda Research relationship.
And I just want to add one thing here, based on what we recently found out. There was a Kroll creditors report that came out last week, and it specifically had mentioned that Ryan Salame had extended a loan to Deltec of what was it, $50 million because Deltec didn't have liquidity, which is crazy to think.
That is crazy. Wow.
Right?
I haven't
Like a
seen
bank.
this yet, but damn.
So this was kind of a two-way street where it's yes, we had Tether supporting Alameda and Tether being supported by Deltec, who would extend these loans to Alameda, and they would work with FTX front-running customers, or however they were doing this to try to capitalize on it and get their arbitrage. But then also you had executives from FTX and Alameda helping Deltec, which is just weird, wild, strange.
And
that, sorry, that reminded me, I only talked about half the relationship there, and Cass kind of reminded me. Like, the other half is that, like Cass said, Alameda extended these loans through Norton Hall to Deltec to allegedly improve capital issues. And then Deltec Bank and Trust executives, with money from Deltec International Group, went out and bought a small bank in Washington called Farmington State Bank, which was doing business as Moonstone Bank, which then received an investment larger than the total amount of assets that bank had from Alameda, and started banking FTX. And so,
well, this is one that I actually want to clarify really quickly, because at least at the time, and in my mind still, what we knew, it seemed like either FTX or Alameda had purchased Farmington. Was it Deltec directly, or
it was Jean Chalopin. It was some of the executives from Deltec. It was not purchased by Deltec, because that would have gotten them an additional set of interest from regulators.
Amazing.
But it was very
easy
related
workaround,
to
I guess.
Deltec.
Jean Chalopin started a company called FBH. Almost, it seems like specifically to purchase Farmington State.
Yeah, Farmington Bank Holding Company.
Yeah. So then he used right. That's right. That's right. Thank you, Bennett. I didn't even think about that. But yes, he used this entity to purchase Farmington. And then right after they purchased it, or not right after they purchased it, but right after they got the go-ahead to change the name and switch their regulatory observation from the FDIC and state regulators to the Federal Reserve, Alameda purchased 10% of it as well.
Okay. So that's the connection there. The rebrand from Farmington to Moonstone was connected to their desire, I believe, to do some kind of crypto banking
and
onshore in the U.S.
And weed. It was to the moon and stoned.
There we go. Yeah.
Brilliant, right?
And so this was kind of, it sounds like mostly a pretty quick turn on whatever implicit lending. I mean, I guess printing tethers that you then get paid back for is essentially a loan from Tether to Alameda. Was that all pretty short term, quick turn stuff, or was Tether kind of on the hook for longer periods of time?
It was Deltec was the one who would be on the hook, and that was kind of Deltec's role in it. Deltec would effectively advance Alameda Research up to $2 billion, and then they would be able to do the intra-account transfer at Deltec from Alameda's account to Tether's account. Tether would then send the tethers. Alameda Research would eventually sell those, and then those dollars would go back to Deltec, and the loan would be cleared out. So Tether, specifically, was not on the hook. Deltec potentially was. And that also gets into Deltec was advancing up to $2 billion, according to the allegations by the debtors in possession. But they also were supposedly receiving a $50 million loan from the Norton Hall set of companies in order to improve capital issues at Deltec Bank and Trust. And those two numbers are vastly different. A company that needs $50 million to improve capital issues should not be extending $2 billion in advances.
Right.
That's saying something. Yeah.
Well, sorry, I just wanted to say, we're getting into kind of the deeper levels of this. I would argue that we even started on the deeper levels, and I just want to bring this back really quick to say, Tether has been around for a very long time. If anyone I assume everyone who's watching or reading your newsletter, David, is pretty familiar with Tether. But if they aren't, I think it's worth delving into the idea that, here you have this stablecoin that has promised one-to-one backing forever. And the conspiracy theorists or Tether truthers have long been saying that regardless of solvency, it's how you get there. Regardless of whether or not you are eventually one-to-one backed, it's how you get there. Is it through illegal means? Is it through shady arbitrage like we're talking about with this FTX stuff? How are you keeping that peg maintained? And for what it's worth, it sure does seem like almost all of the conspiracy theories have been proven correct in that it's like, yeah, well, they were doing shady arbitrage deals. They were working with criminals. They were working with shadow banks. They like all of these things panned out and were true. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware that there is no like backtracking for anyone like Bennett or I, or even more outspoken critics out there. I won't name anyone, but there's people who are large critics of Tether. And I think all of that is justified criticism.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a good example of exactly the kind of, again, nuanced thinking that seems to often elude people, right? Which is, yeah, there's this backdrop where obviously at a certain point, and not even controversially, Tether, even if we assume it was backed with stuff that it should not have been backed by. And that was at huge risk of losing money for a long time, even again, if we 100% assume that there was backing, which, you know, to be clear, my newsletter subscribers, Tether is not my specialty in general, so they might not have gotten the full picture. So,
and
like, all fair game.
I simply want to add here that, like, while you're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, we need to say that there is a guaranteed period of time where they were not 100% backed.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. We know that for a fact. It is 100% assured. We don't have to say allegedly. Like, we don't have to try to like walk carefully around this. They were not fully backed, period. And that is 100% accurate. And I feel
was that
safe
around
saying
the Bitfinex crash?
That was when, yeah. So Bitfinex got hacked, and then they lost their banking access.
By Razzle Khan and Dutchy. Let's just
That's right.
say their names.
Yeah, well, their real names.
Put some respect.
Ilya, Ilya
Lichtenstein
and
Heather
Morgan. But yeah, so they hacked Bitfinex, who, as far as I know, has not received any of those funds back. Which is, interesting. I don't know what that means. It might just be the length of time and difficulty of getting through the justice system. But
you know what, I bet they're probably saving tax money right now because the Bitcoin is appreciating while it's not in their custody. I bet that's
maybe
that might be something happening. Anyway, random thought.
But after the hack, Tether lost its banking access. It was banking through a Taiwan bank that had a correspondent bank being Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo did not want to work with Tether or Bitfinex. And so they lost their banking in Taiwan, and they had to circle around and try to find a place to put their money. They ended up putting a lot of their money into a place called Crypto Capital Corp, which was a shadow bank located in Panama that ran off with their funds. So that is when Tether ultimately became absolutely confirmed not fully backed. Because the money was gone.
Yeah. Tough one, that. So we've mentioned a couple of things that I want to follow up on. First, and Bennett, you kind of alluded that you wanted to talk about this more, but this idea that Alameda was able to sell Tethers at a premium. What do you know about that?
Alameda Research acquired an over-the-counter trading desk called Genesis Block, which they fully integrated into their operations. And this over-the-counter trading desk, as well as some others, seem to do a pretty ready trade in Tethers in Hong Kong, in China, and in Thailand. Genesis Block was Thailand. And so my general thesis for how Alameda Research was able to do this is they were getting the Tethers and then using a variety of over-the-counter trading desks to sell those into China for people who wanted to do capital flight gambling and things like that at slightly above par. And like, we have some reason to believe this. Like an earlier Tether partner and shareholder, Zhao Dong of Renrenbit, was for a long time doing this exact same thing. And he was really a Tether partner. He was on board for when they launched their offshore yuan product. And Zhao Dong was doing this exact same thing, getting Tethers from Tether, selling them at a premium, and then
I
eventually
think I
got arrested.
recognize that name, Cass.
Yeah.
Your interactions with him.
Yeah, I did.
So it seems worth, if this is the other guy who's doing the same thing, it seems worth going into what consequences he faced.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Zhao Dong, yeah. Basically, he had been known as being one of the largest over-the-counter traders for cryptocurrency in all of China at the time. And he had been traveling globally and was in, I think he was in Japan and was or something, and I had written about him before and his role being a Tether partner, and as Bennett mentioned, helping to kickstart Tether Yuan, which immediately rang alarm bells to me. Like the idea. By the way, they have never minted another Tether Yuan since any of this happened. But
Makes
basically, Zhao Dong was the only guy who minted these Tether Yuans. And then I said to him one day, like, "Hey, which island nation are you going to get citizenship to so that you never have to go back to China?" And he said, "You idiot! I love my motherland. I can always go back." And then he went back to China about a week later.
That's getting clipped, by the way, Cass, just for the record.
Then he went back to China about a week later and immediately got arrested when he landed. So there you go. Like I told him, you're going to get arrested if you go back to China, and that is what happened. I don't know if he's still in a prison or labor camp or whatever it is. He was sentenced to
and training.
Right. He was sentenced to something like 7 years, I believe, for money laundering and tax evasion and those kind of charges in China. So yeah, he did face consequences for working with Tether and distributing Tether and helping Bitfinex.
And this is worth going into, I think, because it helps explain the thing that Bennett said, that people were paying a premium for these tethers, right? Which is, maybe they got like $1.05 for each dollar worth of tether, which is because if you're putting it, and I don't know that much about Genesis Block, but if you're putting it through this entity that can get into China, that's essentially illegal dollars flowing into China. And so when things are illegal, you pay more for them generally. This, implicates FTX in a pretty shady international dollar trade.
And I want to be clear too, like getting those dollars into China, while that's illegal, I think the part that it's worth mentioning here is that China doesn't want any of the money leaving China. Mm-hmm. That's the issue. And the problem is that these people are trying to get their hands on dollars specifically because they want their money to exit China eventually. Exactly. So yeah, the reason that China cracks down on this type of behavior is because they do not want capital flight from the mainland.
Yeah. The other thing that we have touched on, and actually before we move on, I don't know if there's any connection, and it doesn't. Well, there's probably some connection, but we also know that FTX, or maybe Alameda, maybe it was Alameda technically, engaged in some light bribery and treason with their interactions with Chinese officials. Are you guys aware of?
Light is a euphemism. I think it was like over $150 million. It
was
right?
A fuckload of money. Yes.
Yeah.
And that was just to unlock.
It's a little bit hard when they quote dollar amounts, because sometimes the bribes were supposed to be like in Bitcoin, and sometimes the prosecutors like to take Bitcoin's appreciation, make their number bigger.
Yeah. So that's true, but those were for unlocking. I think they were for Alameda trading accounts to get unlocked. So there might not be any specific connection there, but they were definitely up to a lot in China.
Well, Protos has specifically gone over some of the, because there's this idea that there was the Japanese arbitrage trade and the kimchi arbitrage trades. Mm-hmm. Like there were these two arbitrage trades that Alameda Research almost exclusively was able to take advantage of. And the problem with that, Bennett and I have both spoken to people like expats and others in Japan. That is not an easy trade to make. It is really difficult. The idea that this, whatever he was, 22-year-old kid, 23-year-old kid, whatever, was able to make this trade while no one else was, 25, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, it would have been more like 25, 26 at that
Sure,
point,
25, 26. The idea he's doing it and not like a 45-year-old investment banker or something is ridiculous and like unheard of. There's early Chinese investors who were early in Alameda Research who like won't discuss that investment. And yeah, like I do think a lot of this capital went into and out of China in weird ways. I also want to say that Deltec and Jean Chalopin have Chinese connections. Not that they're as pertinent as these ones, but Chalopin has had connections to China for like decades now. And I do think that Deltec, until recently, relied on a lot of Chinese capital as well.
Yeah. So I want to talk about one more thing, and that's fascinating. I want to talk about one more thing and then talk more about Deltec in the broader context. And I want to talk about Farmington and Moonstone. And I think that, like, on its face, it sort of is a sensible thing that Deltec or its executives would be like trying to do this workaround to get into U.S. banking. I mean, it's very common. The comparison that I made at the time was to BCCI, which was a different kind of setup, but at the time they were also trying to buy a U.S. bank, sort of secretly, in order to get access to that system.
Did you know, by the way, that Deltec was an investor in BCCI at that time?
I did not know that. That's incredible.
Insane connections, just strange.
In a couple CIA banks.
Yeah, strange coincidences.
Okay,
for sure.
Bennett, you said it, not me. I wait for the knock at the door. So this is what I wanted to talk about, which is there is a credible call it above board, at least, like, linear reason that Deltec would want to own Farmington State Bank, and that Alameda would then want 10% of it, which is just to have this footprint in U.S. banking for what they said it was for, which is crypto, right? But Bennett, I'll let you take this one. What are other reasons that Deltec might have wanted to own a U.S. bank branch clandestinely under its executives holding company instead of as a formal partner?
I think most of the reason is like the obvious one we've already touched on, which is that they wanted a footprint in the United States banking system, ideally one with access to like FedWire and the Federal Reserve's like interbank settlement systems and things like that. And we see that with Farmington moving from FDIC to Fed, and they were hoping to apply for the accounts and stuff they would need eventually. The other part could be like they wanted to do what they claimed they wanted to do, which is operate a crypto staking program that would allow people to take dollars, turn them into crypto, and then stake the crypto in some neobank or whatever. The other interesting wrinkle, and Cas discovered this several years ago, is that there were Deltec Bank executives well before Farmington and Moonstone who wrote like articles about going into the United States and trying to acquire like different small and medium-sized banks.
I remember this reporting, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like that type of activity from Deltec seems to, or at least attempting to do that kind of thing, seems to meaningfully predate Farmington and stuff like that, which kind of meshes with the idea that as a Bahamian bank, that Deltec has occasionally had issues maintaining consistent relationships, allowing them to transact in the US dollar. And there's some evidence that they're still having those kind of issues. There was a June seizure of funds held at UMJ in the name of Deltec in a custody account that allegedly Deltec misrepresented to the other bank about what the purpose of the account was. It was supposed to be like a Deltec corporate account, but Deltec was using it for Deltec customers and stuff like that. And so that there's some things on the periphery that suggest Deltec is still having that trouble getting access to the banking system.
Which kind of is a reasonable transition to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned that it's perhaps because they're a Bahamian bank, right? That is a red flag for a lot of international correspondence. Yeah,
I think that's what you were touching on basically here, which is I think we don't need to bounce about and like try to be careful with this either. The Caribbean is largely known for helping tax evaders and money launderers move money. I mean, that's what they are known for. We have a lot of work from the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, that shows exactly how this works. And I know that a lot of cryptocurrency advocates say stuff like, oh, well, that's just privacy. It has nothing to do with criminality. But the reality is that a lot of it does have to do with criminality. A lot of it is people specifically money laundering and tax evading. And whether it's the Bahamas, the British Virgin Islands, Panama, we can go on and on and on. That's part of it. I also think part of it is like the citizenship clauses that all of these places do, where they're like, oh, you want to become a citizen of whatever, the Cayman Islands? You want to become a citizen of this little tiny, essentially a micronation? Like, let's do it. It'll cost you $200,000. And this leads to like some serious financial reporting issues, I would say.
Yeah, because I assume if people transfer their citizenship to the Bahamas, they have even more protections than they would just by having a bank account there. And it's also, just to set slightly more context, the timing is not the timing, it was a process, but the Bahamas has become this in the wake of essentially the European Union forcing Switzerland and Swiss banks to open up their books after them being the preferred secret banking system for most of the 20th century. And there's a ton of great ironic moments of, the Bahamas rolling out this new crypto regulatory framework and celebrating it as the future. And their first, example of this is FTX.
What's funny, what's even funnier about that I think is worth mentioning is that you're bringing up, there was this framework called the DARE Act in the Bahamas that got passed by the I think it was the former president. I think there's a new
digital assets something.
Yeah. I actually don't remember what it stands for either. Maybe Bennett remembers. It doesn't matter.
First 2 words.
It doesn't matter. My point here being that who essentially helped write it and got it introduced and passed was Jean Chalopin, the head of Deltec Bank. So the head of Deltec Bank was the one who wrote the framework or helped pass the framework that brought FTX into the Bahamas and ended up causing this actual crisis and disaster, not just for the cryptocurrency community, for what it's worth. This was a huge disaster in the Bahamas too.
For the Bahamas, for like actual residents.
Yeah. It's such a David, I'm sure you've tried to do some reporting. I know I have, and I know a few other people who have tried to do reporting out of the Bahamas. I didn't go. I called a lot of people there. They don't talk. They do not talk. They don't trust anyone who is not a resident, who they think isn't going to talk to anyone else. It's incredibly inclusive, which makes sense. It's a tiny little island nation, right? But I've called the central bank, I've called banks, I've called newspapers. People don't want to talk in the Bahamas to somebody who works with a publication in the U.S. I think I think it was a major issue for everyone, and now I think this also goes back to kind of, I think Bennett said this, that Deltec was super important to Tether, FTX, Alameda, the cryptocurrency ecosystem in general. I don't think it plays that role at all anymore. And I think that's because of these disasters. It's because of the way they operated and how secretive they were and how shady they were. And they don't get to do that anymore. But instead of it being like, okay, well, now we're going to work with transparent actors and try to make things better. Well, instead, now they're working with Britannia Bank, which is even more secretive. They're working with
they're so secretive. I've never heard that name before. That's I'm
Britannia. It's owned by the Herrera. It's owned by the Herrera family, billionaires out of Venezuela.
Of course, a bank called Britannia would be owned by Venezuelan billionaires.
That's right. That's right.
With a history of bribery.
With a history of
bribery.
Yeah. Allegedly. Yeah. He's currently in trouble. One of the Herreras is currently in big trouble. Yeah. But anyway, and the Capital Union Bank. These guys have essentially taken over a lot of the former roles that Deltec held, and I'm sure there's other international banks as well that we're unfamiliar with or that have not come up. There's Lithuanian banks, Maltese banks. There's these other players that just come in and out when they need to.
Yeah, and so first I want to just take an opportunity to give a little plug, because a lot of the stuff that you've mentioned obviously was reporting that you've done for Protos, and definitely everybody who's listening to this should go check out Protos and read extensively. They do really incredible investigative work. As Cas mentioned, I was a contract reporter for a few weeks for the trial there, so I'm not totally unconflicted on this, but I've been a fan for a long time. And they really get into the nitty gritty, both when it's Cas's work or Bennett's or everybody else there. So big plug there. And then I wanted to this is a perfect transition point to talk about something that, I think we will have different, I don't know, we probably have similarly complex views on, but you've talked about a lot of banks and the role of banks in all of this criminal money laundering. And I also know, obviously, that you've paid attention to the use of crypto systems to do a lot of criminal money laundering. And so I am curious, with both of those things acknowledged, kind of what y'all's take has been on the full court press that crypto has gotten from people targeting it for money laundering in the United States as a sort of lever for passing really restrictive regulation, and doing, in some cases, I think a lot of crypto people would argue, sort of extra legal clampdowns on crypto actors. Just that discourse, right? Like, what do you guys feel like when you see these big headlines about crypto was used to launder $300 million or whatever, when you guys know very well that the mainstream banking system last year laundered $3 trillion?
Do you want to? I just want to.
I do want to talk about whataboutism as a problem with these arguments, but
sure.
First, let's talk about the substance.
Here's something I want to say to that, and then Bennett, you can take it away for as long as you want. The only thing I want to say to what you were saying, David, there, is that the reason that Tether was really attractive to me as like an issue with the cryptocurrency industry was that it seemed like everyone understood, oh, it's a one-to-one backed stablecoin. Like, you can trust it. It's going to be something that goes away from the volatility of a Bitcoin or an Ethereum or a meme coin, right? Like a Dogecoin or whatever. It goes away from that. You can actually hold something that isn't going to go up or down in value incredibly in a few hours, a few minutes, whatever. And the reality is that the reason that was so attractive to people is that it turns out criminals, as much as a normal person, don't like volatility when they're making deals.
Yep.
And so what I've always focused on is that cryptocurrency, regardless of how useful it is for criminals, which I do think there is a case to be said there, but regardless of how useful it is to criminals, generally criminals need an off-ramp. They need to be able to move that money into real world assets that they can then leverage to do other things. And so that's the focus. That's why I like to focus on banks and stablecoins. But with that said,
stablecoins specifically as an interface between the crypto rails and the mainstream banking system.
That's
and one
right.
Without, nearly the transparency, maybe that's not the right word, but certainly the level of oversight that a lot of exchanges get.
Some.
Yeah.
Well, U.S. exchanges at least.
I think like what Cas is getting at there is kind of like crypto money laundering is a bit weird to think about because like an essential part of money laundering, as Cas alluded to, is integration.
Mm-hmm.
Like the end state of money laundering is having the laundered funds in the form you want to spend them, generally accepted as dollars in the banking system. And so if your end goal is dollars in the banking system, then all of crypto money laundering is going to be a subset of bank money laundering, right? But that kind of misses the point in a certain level when you're thinking about crypto criminality, right? Because if you're only assessing money laundering cases as dollars in the bank account, then of course it's going to be smaller than the bank money laundering because it's a subset. But like the unique thing that drew me to cryptocurrency in the first place, and what I think makes it interesting in these discussions, is like what Bitcoin initially and crypto broadly is uniquely good at, which is like censorship resistance and resilience, right? Bitcoin is uniquely good compared to almost any other mode of payment at making payments that people very much want to not happen. If there are people invested in stopping a payment, there's a chance Bitcoin is going to be your best way to make it. And so then the like types of criminality that become interesting when it comes to crypto are those transfers, or folks doing transfers that would otherwise be stopped in the other avenues. And so I think the reason crypto draws this attention is because, like you kind of talked about, it's outside of their accepted oversight. HSBC can be a massive money laundering group, and
it is.
It is, and has been, and aided and abetted a huge portion of criminality. But like at the end of the day, the government is relatively confident that there are people there they can get a hold of, and if needed, slap cuffs on to exert whatever power they need to be. Crypto is this more amorphous type of criminality, and so the press, at least to me, seems in part like trying to prevent a category of crime that they don't have other tools to deal with, or that many of their tools are ill-suited to dealing with.
So it's really more about like, we already kind of control these guys so we can let them get away with a little bit. And maybe that's like, even useful at a certain point.
Yeah. Like you find out it's happening. Yeah. You let go on for 6 months, a year. You identify the counterparties, and then you have them pay the fine. Or if it's a smaller entity, if it's not an HSBC and it's a smaller one, you kill it off. You have someone buy the assets. You roll it into a more compliant entity without like disruption for the honest customers, and with you now having the information you need for the criminal investigations or whatever.
And this connects to a small issue that you might have something interesting to say about, not a small issue, but a tangential issue to our current discussion, which is now with Binance, there is like a small degree of that, right? Because they have the overseers inside the building. What is that, do you think, going to imply for...
Well, this is something that Bennett and I talked about in one of our recent episodes, where I feel both... like it's a weird dynamic. I think if we're just reflecting on like numbers of laws broken and the concept of like Binance aiding terrorist organizations and stuff like that, without a doubt, I think that has happened, and they've probably done it more than say FTX did. But what Binance didn't do is gamble away all of their customers' money.
Yeah.
And so that where do we draw the line here of what is important criminality, what deserves time in a penitentiary versus what doesn't? And on top of that, like you said, there's all these people there now at Binance who are watching people do illegal things as though they're not there, which I think is astounding to me that that the government has basically openly said, "Yo, we're monitoring."
That's of what's going on right now is that everything is basically continued unchanged, just with the monitors in place watching it.
Well, why would they change it? And why would they're doing more KYC and stuff now? But why change anything, right? Like people seem to believe that they can just still use Binance the way it is. It's still the number one most voluminous cryptocurrency exchange in the world. So why stop anyone? Just let them continue to think they're safe and then honeypot. Like, I believe that that's a fair assessment of probably what's going on. How long does that last? I don't know. And is it worth it? I don't know, right? Like, what kind of criminals are using Binance? It's a good question. Like, are they bigger criminals than CZ and starting, like, the people who founded the cryptocurrency exchange and are allowing all of these trades to happen? I don't know. It's a good question. But that's what the government has essentially decided, right? They said, you're more valuable giving us this exchange and paying a fine and doing a little bit of jail time or whatever than us shutting this whole thing down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like the monitor was key to whatever deal was going to be made with Binance. And so Binance agreed to pay what I think is the largest fine in all of history and turn this all over. And all I've been running through in my head since then is the number of criminal cases we saw following the Alphabet seizure. Like when the United States Department of Justice was able to seize Alphabet and get all of their records,
That's how they got Razzlecon.
Yes, exactly. They started working down like every Hydra counterparty, eventually getting to Binance, as well as like a bunch of other people, and used the information from Alphabet to lead a whole bunch of those investigations and indictments. And so when I look at Binance, what I see is that my guess is that's a significant motivator for them. Yeah. There are very few actors in crypto, good, bad, or otherwise, who had no interactions with Binance over the last several years, Yeah. And going forward for any bad actor, it's going to be more difficult for them to like create clean wallets that have never had interactions with Binance or something like that. And so getting this large source of information, of activity, of knowledge about these flows and stuff, I'm convinced that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
It gave them a huge insight into like what the crypto market actually looks like and who's got what types of money.
And probably goes some distance to explain, the fine was large, but the overall penalty, including CZ's sentence, were pretty, trivial, I think would be not a totally unfair way to characterize it.
Arthur Hayes and Changpeng Zhao are far more mature than Sam Bankman-Fried, was also my takeaway from the sentences.
Hired legal teams that represented them
and then listened
well.
to them, and then actually like did what they said, which is, you know, like honestly pure alpha for those of us who enjoy watching Sam Bankman-Fried suffer. But you know, I also will say, and you know, I'll give, just so that my more pro crypto perspective is represented, which is that, you know, my read of the Binance volumes after the settlement is actually more to the effect that, okay, like any criminal that's still doing business on Binance right now is a moron. And I think that a lot of criminals are morons, but not 100% of them. And so like my take is on the volume stuff, at least, is that, like, you know, it seems like a lot of the activity going through Binance is legitimate if they're willing to continue that, you know, under the oversight of a U.S. Supervisor. But
here's my retort to that, which is to say that cryptocurrency liquidity is fleeting. Right? If you go to a different exchange, if you go to Huobi or HTX or whatever it's called now, the liquidity is going to be...
Then you're also a moron.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. But this is what I'm saying is, like, your options dwindle quite quickly. Like, the order books on these exchanges are thin, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're trading some of the larger assets, like, these order books are thin. Or you're going to a place like Coinbase or something where maybe the order books aren't as thin, but now you're doing KYC AML. Like, so like I said, there's not a lot of options for now until something comes to replace Binance. So right now, I would say, even if you are a criminal, unless you're really good at OPSEC, operational security, or you have OTC desks where you can do this stuff or whatever, like, it's difficult to not use Binance at all, I guess, is my point.
And OTC, you have to move some serious size. And when you're talking about the only other option that I would put on the table there is like Uniswap, which is expensive, maybe slightly technically challenging for some people, but most of all, totally transparent. Whereas like a centralized exchange has that obscuring hop usually. And, you know, at least like with Binance, I guess, if we're operating on your thesis, Cas, at least like for Binance, it like has to be the internal auditor who catches you. Whereas if you're doing it on Uniswap, like you could be in a ZachXBT thread tomorrow and be done. Which, you know, is also a sad testament to the relative powers of crypto native and U.S. government investigators, but topic for another day. So we got Binance, and I think that is interesting. That there just are no other options is a good explanation of why it's a trap. And you know, hopefully, I mean, and this is the other thing that I will say from the slightly more pro crypto side of the conversation here is that, like, I'm totally all for that, and I think a lot of other people are too, right? Where you have like really strict oversight of this offshore thing that is going to, whether it's today or tomorrow, squeeze out some of the criminal activity that, you know, nobody is actually like in favor of anyway. So, you know, that it's kind of healthy for crypto. I hate to be the guy who's like good for Bitcoin, but it's kind of good for Bitcoin. Which I guess is also like an apt transition to our last big topic for the episode, which is, yeah, I guess like you guys kind of like Bitcoin, right? And this is a thing that drives your fans insane. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I was initially attracted to cryptocurrency because I thought Bitcoin had a legitimately unique and interesting system that enabled something that not many other things did, these censorship-resistant transfers of value. And when I eventually started learning about Ethereum, I thought this is an interesting version of like censorship-resistant modifications of the value, whatever you want to call the smart contracts. And I was learning about this in 2018, so many of them were far more rudimentary than now. But like conceptually, that made a certain kind of sense that kind of thing would be valuable for a certain subset of people. Broadly, though, I think that my most frequent critique has been that even the people who seem excited about censorship resistance often failed to grapple with the kind of
double-edged sword.
Double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. Double-bladed, double-edged sword of censorship resistance.
The Darth Maul lightsaber of censorship resistance.
There you go.
The double-bladed scimitar of censorship resistance is that when you if you get scammed, if you buy a product that's not good, that money is gone from you and there's no easy way to get it back. If you are in favor of certain organizations being cut off from the financial system because of their engagement in terror, trafficking, whatever, it is possible for some of those organizations to maintain their activities thanks to things like Bitcoin or things like that. And so often in my critiques, I get caught on that double-edged sword. And that was often my biggest frustration and what led to many of my criticisms is it felt like many of the advocates weren't grappling with it and many of the critics had never actually thought about it.
Yeah, I'll say that when I got interested in Bitcoin, I think what made me so fascinated was that it was a non-state created money. I just loved that concept of an individual or a group of individuals. I guess we don't know, but someone that wasn't a government being hey, we're gonna create money now, and maybe everyone will use it,
right?
Yeah, it's super cool, right? And it's very interesting. And as Bennett pointed out here, there's instantly niche use cases that anyone could back, right? If you want to fund a journalist in a dictatorial regime, exactly. It's really cool that you could actually send them money that isn't going from one bank to another bank. That's awesome. And I think it's worthwhile to point that out and be I like this part of this concept, even if I don't like everything about the concept. And I think what you're talking about, I think I've been a little bit more sensitive to this than Bennett maybe, but we certainly faced a lot of backlash because we said, hey, Bitcoin isn't just strictly bad Ponzi scheme thing. It has some level of use. And there was a lot of people who thought because we felt that way, we actually weren't good advocates for criticism and skepticism. And I take the opposite perspective of that, where I think it's really beneficial to have critics and skeptics who are engaged with both sides of this, who understand
understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Bennett and I, even we were talking about this before we hopped on, but Molly White, who is, I think she's largely known as, far more than Bennett and I, she's known as the critic and skeptic of cryptocurrency. She's taken that mantle and run with it, and I love that. But she recently put out an article where she was talking about the Tornado Cash devs. If anyone is unfamiliar, Tornado Cash was a mixing service, and these guys created it, and basically all of them are facing years in prison because of that. And the reason she seems to be, I guess, kind of siding with the developers is because she herself is a developer, and that she thinks that the idea that people are getting arrested and thrown in prison for something they're writing as opposed to something they're actively working on and working with to aid and abet criminals is a really bad precedent to set. I agree. I largely agree with her, but I also think it's worth looking at things like Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. I mean, even Dogecoin, meme coins, any of these things that can be used for positive things as well as negative things. And that even though the negative aspects, the scams, the frauds, I think they do take center stage. They are the loudest activists and players in the industry. That isn't solely what all of this is being utilized for.
And, the fact that you mentioned the scams and frauds, which in various forms have really been you guys' main focus. And I think that there has been, because, I've been doing this since 2017. You guys have been doing it since 2020 or before. And I think that over the last couple of years, at least for me, I've really sensed a shift in the crypto people themselves, sort of having this new understanding that basically skeptics are like the immune system of an industry like this, and that there are upsides to having people who are calling out frauds. Have you guys had different experiences more recently in terms of how people receive your work?
I think I talked to you about this, David, a little while ago. I noticed a shift. Might have been 2 or 3 years ago, honestly. It wasn't exactly like super recently.
Yeah.
But I certainly noticed a shift that there was a time from 2018 to, I would say, roughly 2020, where Bennett and I and others who were calling out scams and frauds and individuals who were behaving badly, people would tell us to shut the fuck up. They would tell us that we didn't know what the fuck we were talking about, that we, and again, conspiracy theorists, right? Everything we were saying about Tether was a conspiracy theory. We didn't know what we were talking about. We're just FUD, spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt. All of those things that we were saying about Tether have proven to be true. All of the fraudsters, like tons of the fraudsters and scammers, the Celsiuses, the loan sharks, and the bad actors have been, that we were calling out in 2018, 2019, 2020, they've had to face the music. And once that started to happen, I think we saw a lot more support from Bitcoin advocates, cryptocurrency advocates. I think it started shifting from Crypto Critics Corner being a no coiner podcast to Crypto Critics Corner being an industry podcast, which is actually a huge shift as far as I'm concerned. Maybe Bennett disagrees.
I think it's, and I mean, the fact that you guys are now, I gather, full-time or doing at least a lot of work for Protos, which is just a full-on crypto news site, albeit a pretty unique one. Bennett, did you want to get in on that? Have you had a shifting experience in how you're sort of seen by people in crypto?
I'm not sure, is what I kept thinking when you asked that question. Because, I think that Cas is right that our brand, especially during first Terra Luna and then Celsius 3AC and then especially during FTX, our podcast audience shifted pretty substantially to more significantly represent kind of people in the crypto industry. But I still feel like there's a bit of, I've become more disconnected from certain parts of crypto than I was in 2018, 2019, things like that. I used to spend more time with the gens, I think, paying attention to what shitcoin traders were saying, paying attention to stuff like that. And now I ignore huge swaths of cryptocurrency, all the meme coins, most of the NFTs, and a lot of the metaverse stuff, mostly because it seems to be full of idiots. And when I do comment on those things, I often find that my views are not more accepted than they were back in 2018.
I think that's a worthy carve out, right? It's a very stratified industry in the sense that, yes, there are entire sectors that are fully populated by fucking morons.
I don't want us to be popular with people who are the Dogecoin guys, the dog with hat people. We don't need them.
I don't think
we don't need those people to be listening to Crypto Critics Corner. They don't give a shit about criticism, right? They simply want to meme their way to wealth.
They just want to ride the snake, baby.
Totally. But
I'm just kind of saying, when I kick those beehives,
sure, but
there's still a lot of bees that come out that
I guess what I'm saying is there were a lot of people who are I would say they're cryptocurrency individuals who Bennett and I at least know to be respected in the industry. Whether or not they're respected by the world or whatever is another story, but respected within the industry, who have told us basically yo, we really appreciate your podcast. We appreciate you being critical and doing this work to expose the bad stuff because it's there and we should acknowledge it. And I think that was a huge shift because maybe it was just that until, from 2014 to 2018, cryptocurrency could still fail. It was fighting for its life. You don't need these criticisms. So maybe that's the shift, that everyone is coming to a basic understanding of well, it's going to exist whether you like it or not.
That's a really good point. So I want to shift to one more related topic, which is we talked at the top of the show a little bit about no coiners, and you guys were like, we're not no coiners. We don't own anything now. And I guess I was just going to say that, like, to my mind, no coiner is not so much anymore literally whether or not you own crypto. It's a specific attitude towards crypto, which is, I think, Cas maybe already said, there's a certain class of people who believe that everything about cryptocurrency is just a scam writ large, and usually in a very vague sense. And I actually, like, putting it this way, I think gives it some credence even for me, but people feel like Bitcoin is a decentralized Ponzi scheme, or, the dumber ones will just say it's a Ponzi scheme, and then when you ask them what they mean, they can't really explain it. I'll throw out one name, Stephen Deal, who I think kind of really is kind of the ne plus ultra of this category of people, who, have such, like, they're almost the opposite of the NFT Dogecoin people, who have an almost religious belief in the ultimate badness of this stuff in a way that prevents them from actually looking at it, I feel like, with any nuance or curiosity, frankly.
I mean, I think that you're discussing to me, I've had discussions with friends who are both no coiners and neck deep into cryptocurrency about this. And I think we live in the Overton window era. And the idea that there's these people who are taking the most extreme perspective, in either direction, like meme coins are the only future, tokenization is the only way forward, or,
right.
oh my God, everything is literally a scam. It's all a Ponzi scheme. We need to stop all of it. Get the police to stop it, or whatever. Those fly because extremism drives clicks. It has for years now. And so a nuanced perspective where you're like, well, wait a second. Both of these people are talking nonsense. We need to meet somewhere in the middle where there's reality.
Facts, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. Facts, nuance. Logic. Let's meet there. It's not attractive for clicks. For clicks, it's just simply not there. I'm frankly concerned about that, because not only are we entering the era of Overton window where it's all extremism, but we're entering the era of, like, AI taking over journalism. And now you're going to have AI relying on Overton window people to spew out facts to everyone else. And I don't know what that means for the future. Like, it is troubling.
Well, have you guys seen the glue on pizza Google AI assistant result?
Yeah, of course.
It's going to be that, but for cryptocurrency and everything else.
Yeah, well, so I don't know if you've ever listened to the podcast Search Engine, David,
No.
But there's a podcast called Search Engine. It's by PJ Vogt, and it's fantastic. Recently, he did an episode specifically about AI and, like, the dangers of AI, and I think it really describes my concerns with it the best, because we're talking about my work, right? My work is in journalism and criticism and skepticism. And all of those fields are going to be in danger because now AI is going to get all of those clicks, and none of the advertising is going to go to people who are putting in the work. And I don't know what the solution is for that. And I don't know what, and I think we're already entering a really dire stage, because you have people like Elon Musk pushing the craziest fucking conspiracy theories and the most absurd concepts, as opposed to, again, the middle ground where you can actually find some sort of agreement and mediation. Like, no one is interested in that anymore.
Yeah, I think that the truth is going to go back to being very much a niche boutique product. So we're getting towards the end of our window here, and believe me, I could talk about AI forever. But are there other things that you guys want to touch on, whether that you're currently working on, or just interesting things that have been in the crypto space or even not crypto recently? Cas is pointing like there's something.
I'm waiting for Bennett, because he had that look like.
No, I was trying to think. Nothing was coming up. Justin Sun's probably insolvent, but we know that. We all know that.
Yeah. Justin Sun is
Old
a pretty
news, wah wah,
niche.
boring.
That's not something that's happening. That's just something I keep looking at every month and being like, oh, it hasn't blown up yet.
Yeah.
I think something I want to say is that I also got a DM from someone saying like, oh, you're just over crypto now. Like you're talking about AI, you're talking about this other stuff. No, I'm not over crypto. I almost exclusively still talk about cryptocurrency. I almost exclusively still talk about, like even if it's Sam Altman, I'm talking about WorldCoin. So I think there are obviously waves to all of this. Bennett and I focus on, in general, we focus on scams, frauds, and larger issues in tech and cryptocurrency. But I think trying to encapsulate any of us, whether it's you, David, or us, or other people, like all of it is kind of amalgamated now, right? Tech is this just giant thing, and there's going to be tech journalists that cover it in a super positive light, and there's going to be tech journalists who are way more critical, and there's room for both, I guess. I tend to think that super positive coverage is more in line with public relations. But regardless, I think it's all of us are going to be covering all of this stuff. Like whether it's AI or cryptocurrency or the next buzzword thing, we're going to be covering it, and there's going to be frauds, there's going to be scams, and there's going to be problems. And that's the focus. So the idea that we're shifting focus and engaging in multiple things at once is nothing new. And I don't want people to think like, oh, Bennett and Cas don't care about cryptocurrency. Like, of course we do. Yeah. And of course we're fascinated by it still. Of course it's still, Bennett said he ignores a lot of the traders and what they're moving coins with and stuff. I tend to agree, but I also think there's moments, we just had one where it's like Caitlyn Jenner getting involved and everyone's asking tons of questions. Right. Good questions about deep fakes, good questions about who's in charge of this Twitter account, good questions about, is this going to be a thing where there's a bunch of like celebrities getting involved? Are they going to get sued by the SEC? All of these questions are important.
The answer is yes.
Yes, for all of it, right? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
Crazy to me that in 2024, in the year of our Lord, 2024, Caitlyn Jenner is on Twitter shilling a coin. Like,
to be
it's
fair,
It's
insane.
probably not her.
Yeah, to be fair, it's Sophia. It's largely Sophia Hutchins, as far as I can tell, or Sahel Aurora. These two individuals who were involved with it, right? Like, I don't think
even the video. Did that turn out to be?
Oh, no. The second video is 100% Caitlyn Jenner, as far as I can tell. But the first one was weird, right? Everyone was saying it was deep fake because her eyebrows were like jumping from this part of her forehead to this part, on both sides. And you're golfing all day, so you can't send out a tweet. I think this is a reckoning for a lot of like normal people where they're going like, wait, so most celebrities don't tweet? Like, yeah. Surprise, they're not in charge of their social media. But yeah, there are these watershed moments. They're going to keep happening. They're going to keep being weird, and they're going to involve more and more tech, right? It's not going to be crypto. It's going to be, now it's crypto and AI. Now it's crypto and this and that. And yeah, as you said, surprise, Caitlyn Jenner is doing this in 2024, I guess. But also, Caitlyn Jenner isn't like Kylie Jenner or Kim Kardashian.
Of morality, you think?
Yeah, exactly. Like this person is and this is something I also wanted to say. Caitlyn Jenner's 74 years old. Like this is an older person.
Yeah.
This is somebody.
Septuagenarian Fox News contributors might be doing things without their full cognitive
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. So I just want to
it wasn't deep fakes. It was just like the Giuliani thing.
Yeah. Like melting eyebrow. Anyway, that was my last comment.
No, and Bennett, go for it.
Sorry, just to cap off what Cas said, I would also add that like learning about many things and thinking critically about many things makes you better at learning and thinking critically, right? Like cross-domain thought is the core of creating new things or having insights. You should read about a lot of things.
Yeah, and also like to put a really fine point on it, almost the exact same tactics are being used, and in many cases, including the Rabbit R1 thing that happened last week, in many cases the same people are running the AI scams as are running the crypto scams. And it's all based on this idea that people don't fully understand the actual underlying technology, right? Like, I think that like the Rabbit thing was so embarrassing. Did you guys see this? They actually like
Yeah.
The guy had launched an NFT thing, including promising in recordings that are out that he was going to create a carbon negative Bitcoin 2.0. So he was just like hitting all of the buzzwords in crypto at the same time.
I do want to say again, you mentioned like Caitlyn Jenner in the year 2024. Like, yo, have we not heard about a Bitcoin fork being carbon negative or this or that or this or that for the past 10 years? Like, this is not new.
That's literally a 2016 era pitch for like
exactly.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember Bitcoin Gold? Like, these things are not new, and I'm not surprised by them, I guess is my point.
And at a certain point, I mean, I guess you always feel sorry for victims, but at a certain point you feel less sorry. And
that's a point that is something I've said before where I think I was on I got to be on Search Engine before it was called Search Engine. And in that episode he was like, so how did you start going down this skeptic critic rabbit hole kind of like this thing? And part of my point was I started trying to save people, that I was trying to like stop people from making bad financial decisions. And since then I just simply do not care, because people who desperately want to make those bad decisions, they're going to do it whether I want them to or not. I compared it to going into a casino and going up to people who are gambling and being like, don't do that, you're going to lose money. And then being like, I know I'm going to lose money, please fuck off. So I like that's how I felt for a while as a skeptic and critic in cryptocurrency, until I took the initiative to be like, they don't want you to save them, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that's totally true, except I have another, and we are wrapping up here, but, you know, a new thing that has really come onto my radar just in the last few weeks, frankly, in the course of my research about SBF, is just exactly how hard it is for many people to recognize sociopaths specifically. And I think that a lot of people, like there are the people like you are talking about who are just in the casino and they're happy about that. But I do think, and these are the really tough ones to read about, and that I think, you know, both of our work still does help these people, I hope, is that like there are some people who genuinely believe it when like Do Kwon tells them that Anchor is a great place to put their money at 25% APR. And like really like don't even understand the concept that somebody might be out to actually harm them. I think that there are people like that.
I want to say that I agree with you. There's plenty of people who have reached out to me or Bennett, I'm sure, and told us like, thank you for the work you do, it saved me money, or thank you for the work you do, it means a lot to me. I don't disagree with that. I think what I'm talking about is more in line with like actually trying, like having the hero complex. Like, I need to save these people.
Right.
Like, no, you don't.
Drive
you
yourself
don't.
crazy. Mostly.
Exactly. And piss people off.
Yeah. Well, folks, I think that is a good place to leave it if people haven't already stopped listening. So tell us where they can find your work, which is kind of everywhere. Crypto Critics Corner of the podcast, I assume on all major podcatchers and platforms. What else have you got out there?
We both write for Protos Media. I also have a channel on YouTube where I put out some videos.
Protos.com, I think?
Yes, Protos.com.
A great crypto news outlet. And yeah, Bennett, I occasionally watch your personal channel, which is just like fun little chit chats. So that's always cool to check in on.
Yep. I hope that at some point in the next year or so that Bennett and we've been meaning to do a couple things that were, whether it's larger investigative work on our Crypto Critics Corner YouTube channel, or we've been talking about writing a Tether book for several years now. But I'm hoping that in the next year or two, we are able to focus a little bit more and get both of those going.
Cool. Well, something to look forward to. Bennett Tomlin and Cas Piancey, thank you so much for being a guest on Dark Markets. I don't know, maybe you'll get some fresh hate out of this one.
Let's hope so.
All the clicks are worth the same amount of money, people.
Thanks, David.
All right, take care, y'all. Hope Cascoin does well.
Yes.
Buy Cascoin. Buy Cascoin. Buy Cascoin.